So, hello to everybody. Welcome to segment 2, Enabling Full Sector Transformation, a session that will provide an insight into global, regional, and local pathways and roadmaps to net zero, and what the key ingredients are to driving action and enabling change in the built environment. And as indicated at the outset, for the session, we do have interpretation, French-English, so please select that in case you need it. And we will be starting this with an interactive poll. Results we will actually show at the end of the panel. And if you could bring up the poll, please. And the first question that we would like you to answer is, which of the following categories is key to transforming buildings and construction in your area? And it's a multiple choice question, so you can select several. So from urban planning to new buildings, existing buildings, building operations, appliances, materials, resilience to clean energy. And the same goes as beforehand, the host and panelists cannot vote. It's really for our participants. Okay, I hope you've all been able to provide your responses on those categories that are key, that you think are key to transforming the built environment in your area. And maybe with that, we can move to a second question that we wanted to raise with you as well. And that is hopefully coming up in a second. Okay, and here it is, and that's which national policy action is most critical? And here again, you have a multiple choice, mandatory building energy codes, net zero targets in NDCs, performance-based building codes, building passports, public procurement incentives, or demand-based incentives. And while you're putting in your responses to this, I just proceed with, telling you a little bit about the lay of the land of the session. So we will have two presentations, one on forging regional roadmaps for going net zero, which I will be taking, and then taking a closer look at materials with the launch of a new report of the International Resource Panel, which is called Resource Efficiency and Climate Change, Material Efficiency Strategies for a Low Carbon Future. And this will be introduced by two of the Resource Panel members. One is Edgar Hertwig. He's a member and lead author of this report, and also the International Chair in Industrial Ecology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And then Reid Lifset, also lead author of this report and a research scholar and resident fellow in industrial ecology at Yale University. Oh, we do have results. I thought we would share them at the end, but here we go. So results of the question number 1, which national policy action is most critical? We do see mandatory building energy codes coming up as the really most clicked response, followed by performance-based building codes. So codes are really, really high in demand, and then followed by demand-based incentives, and as well a reflection of net zero targets in the NDCs. Okay. Maybe we bring up then the results of the second question. Actually, that was the second question, apologies. The first question was about the areas. And the area that came out highest is existing buildings. So that is where where you believe in your area we need to put the biggest emphasis. And that's followed by urban planning and clean energy and the materials. So I'm sure we will hear more about the materials as well. Maybe at the end of the materials session, we'll need to ask you the question again and see whether there is a different picture coming up. Anyway, so with that, we'll get into the presentations. And now I will try to share my screen. I am disabled, so that's for the technical team. I cannot share the screen. I'm not allowed to. Can you just enable that for me, please? No, I still am not allowed to share my screen. If that is not unblocked soon, maybe I can ask the technical team to just bring on. Now I'm allowed to. Sorry for seeing my mess. Okay, here we go. And that's the presentation coming up. Okay, now here we go. And that's really about the regional roadmaps for transforming buildings and construction. Why buildings? For those of you who have not been convinced already before joining this session, you've heard already so much about the importance of the sector, so I think we can skip that to some degree. I just want to highlight again this key number as a key takeaway. Almost 40% of energy and process-related CO2 emissions go back to the sector. And for all the other numbers, I just want to refer you to the Global Alliance's Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction, which we put out annually. And there's a new version that will be launched later this year that is pretty finalized and coming out with additional numbers. And obviously, we also heard that as well. It's not only, buildings are not only a topic for climate, but also a topic for sustainable development overall, at a time where we spend most of our days inside at the moment in our homes. I think the message has been brought home very, very clearly.
Martina, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Your presentation is in presenter view, so we cannot see it very well. Can you change it? Otherwise, we can share it for you.
I had put it on.
Just at the top of your screen, there's display settings, and you have to click that to switch the display. Just next to it.
Go.
Yeah, there you go. And here's
well, okay. Apologies for that.
Yeah.
So now we go back. So in terms of well, the importance of housing for all of us at the time of the pandemic, and I think this message has been brought home very clearly, where the pandemic has come on top of a housing crisis, and those who are most vulnerable have been even more vulnerable. So it's pretty clear it's not only about climate, but it's also about health and well-being, and that takes us to the issue of thermal comfort. And we already highlighted the fact that in a warming world, the issue of cooling will be even more important going forward. And if we meet that cooling demand with energy demanding devices, we just further perpetuate the issue. So that means that we have to make some of the fundamental changes. We already heard it's not only about buildings themselves, but how they interact with their ecosystem, meaning the city. So it's really important for livable and equitable cities as well. And we heard how important it is to be prepared and be more resilient. And the pandemic has just highlighted that big time again. We also heard already in the last session how important it is to connect buildings with the energy system, and to make sure that we actually connect into a renewable energy integration. And finally, the job potential has been highlighted very much as well, economic development and job potential. Now, 2 words about the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. It was founded at COP21, is hosted by UNEP, and has now gathered over 150 members from governments, private sector, civil society, research, and intergovernmental organizations, all working together towards a common vision of a zero-emission, efficient, and resilient buildings and construction sector. So it's really a global platform, the leading global platform to do the global advocacy, as a catalyst and bring together people to exchange experiences, but also to track progress. I already mentioned the Global Status Report, which is a great tool for doing that, and to support countries in setting their own targets and commitments based on their situation. And with that, I go into the heart of things, the regional roadmap. So that's one of our flagship, it's a series of flagship products, basically, to forge pathways through these roadmaps. And the regional roadmaps have been modeled after a global roadmap that has been put together. And they are really blueprints for action. They provide a framework and a process with targets, timelines, case studies, and key actions. And they were developed together with our partner, the International Energy Agency, and inputs from over 700 experts across the globe. And they were done for Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And there's one more for the Arab region that is underway. Oops. And here you see the relation to the climate action pathway that was mentioned in the morning in the first session by Nigel, and really there's different products, including these roadmaps, but also including the World Green Building Council Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment and the Building System Carbon Framework from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the Cities for Climate call for action at the local level as well, that informed this human settlements pathway. And it is really about the radical collaboration. So they all connect. If you ask yourself the question, they connect together. And now to give you a snapshot of what is in these roadmaps, and it's actually 8 key areas that provide this menu of options for country priorities, and they range from urban planning to new buildings, existing buildings, basically the whole list that you saw in your question already that we asked. And it does show every time the global the current status and recommended actions. So for urban planning, for example, there's a recognition that there's a real lack of integration across themes in urban planning decisions. And so we need to, going forward, we need to actually change that and make this integration. For new buildings, well, a lot of the new buildings are actually not covered by code or mandatory minimum energy performance standards. So we actually need to change that as well and prioritize high efficiency standards, develop decarbonization strategies, implement, develop and implement codes, and incentivize high performance. And I won't read through all of them, but I think it's really important to see, for you to see what is actually captured in there to get the gist of where we're headed. Existing buildings, it is about this acceleration of action on building retrofits and actually make them deeper, well-planned retrofits. Building operations, we heard how important it is to have that sort of product guarantee in place so that we know what's happening with the building in the use space and to help facilitate maintenance and building management. Now that's the next set of 4 with appliances and systems, where we need to stimulate more demand for energy efficient appliances. And obviously, if I say that, it's with that caveat that we need to do as much as we can to avoid energy demands in the first place. So some of those appliances maybe will be impacted by that, but there will be innovation possibilities for new ones. Then the materials, and I won't say much about this, because we will have a whole session that will zoom in on that. Resilience, really, really important that we not only look at the mitigation, but also at adaptation and creating resilience of buildings. And there is actually not enough done to date. It's been done in areas where, for example, we have earth-prone regions. There has been a huge focus on codes and developing things to code and build that in. But we need to do that more also with regard to climate and clean energy. It's really to accelerate the decarbonization of electricity and also heat and cooling. To give you a further idea of how things are shaped in these roadmaps, it's about key actions for each area with an example now here for the new buildings. So this is what we've done for all of the areas. For new buildings, the activity today, 2020, is that 2/3 of countries do not have mandatory or voluntary codes for minimum energy performance requirements of new buildings. And we need to actually ratchet that up with medium-term and longer-term goals, taking us from, the new to, focus on new buildings, but then all buildings, covering that, and from mandatory, from voluntary. Then policies for each area. And here again, this building, new building as an example, to show you how deep things are going. There's an emphasis on building codes. There's also compliance with building codes. There's participation of the informal sector. That obviously is a huge issue, particularly for developing countries, so that we have the tools to enable simplified compliance, to make sure that over time, most of the sector is actually compliant with building codes. And then the emphasis on building labeling as a key tool to drive things further and to go from stepwise as well, from new buildings with labels to actually covering most of the buildings with labeling and then making them eventually mandatory. Here's a couple of examples just to illustrate how we've broken that down to then the regions and what different regions have put forward as being really key points. And for Asia, came out this labeling of building components was important. Building passports were highlighted very much. Taking a life cycle analysis approach was really critical, as well as providing the right incentives and the increased use of financial and non-financial incentives to reward high performance. We also at the outset said, well, it's all about bringing together the different stakeholders, and this is what we've done for each of the areas. We've looked at the different types of stakeholders and marked up who has, well, everybody has a role, as you can see, but who has a driving role and who needs to be brought on board as well. And that's how it shows, from national to subnational government, but also covering utility companies, for example, then the property and project developers, to the financial institutions, but also look at all all the folks that are involved, from the design of a building to building it, and really installing the things, and the building owners and occupants that we've mentioned at the outset as well, really important. And what do the results mean for stakeholder groups? So that's an example for the policymakers. And obviously here it's the building codes that are really, really critical. Develop performance-based building codes, but also considering to include elements in the nationally determined contributions, such as passive design, but resilience, life cycle approach, and low carbon materials. And another example, in terms of well, what it means for stakeholders, and here is the example of designers, and really bringing everybody together. And we said that as well in the first session, we heard it, how important it is that everybody is working hand in hand. And what we miss out on in the design stage is haunting us afterwards. So it is really critical to get things right from the beginning and plan in the different facets already. And obviously this can be very much influenced by the building codes. Not only can, but must be. And that's the outlook for the future. So it's about implementing the roadmaps, and these regional roadmaps have already started to spark regional dialogue and collaboration. They've led to some concrete actions taken and national strategies for decarbonization coming on. They've started to create a movement to raise the ambition levels, and there is also a support to filling data gaps, because we've been able through this process to highlight some of the key gaps. So what comes next? What is really critical is that we take those regional roadmaps to the national level, that these national level processes do fall into place, and that this influences as well the NDC reviews, the one that is upcoming, but also the subsequent ones. And with that, I'd like to stop my presentation. I stop sharing my screen. I hope that works. And with that, I would like to hand over to the launch of the Resource Efficiency and Climate Change report that focuses on material efficiency strategies for a low carbon future by the International Resource Panel. And I already introduced Edgar and Reed. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, it is a pleasure for me to introduce the modeling part of this work, of the report Resource Efficiency and Climate Change, Material Efficiency Strategies for a Low Carbon Future. And you might wonder, why are we looking at materials? It is because materials are increasingly important in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions. In 1995, about 5 billion tons of CO2 equivalents were emitted in the production of materials. By 2015, this number had increased to 11.5 billion tons. So now constituting 23% of global emissions. This is an amount that can no longer be overlooked. Iron and steel and other metals account for a substantial portion of these greenhouse gas emissions, followed by cement and other construction minerals. Plastics and rubber also plays a certain role. As has been said at the opening this morning, there is actually a challenge of finding the technologies in order to decarbonize iron and steel production and cement production. This is something that you cannot solve simply with the employment of clean energy technologies. Rather, other technologies like hydrogen-based steel production need to be commercialized before they can be rolled out on a large scale. So we're actually looking at a decade-long time before several decade-long time before we can expect to decarbonize material production completely. During that time, reducing materials use is really our main option, and shifting to less emissions intensive materials. And this is exactly what we have looked at in this International Resource Panel report. We have looked at opportunities for the reduction of the use of emissions intensive materials through the life cycle of products. starting with the design. Are there designs by which a product can be designed with using less materials or using materials that are less emissions intensive? For example, in building, substituting the use of reinforced concrete with wood. Can we improve the yield and reduce the waste during the construction process, thereby requiring less primary material to produce the same structure? What are the options to actually deliver the same amount of service with fewer products through a more intensive use strategy? How can we extend the lifetime of products so that we need to produce fewer of them? What are options to recover parts, remanufacture and reuse those parts in new products or as spare parts? And what are options to recover materials and recycle them to replace primary materials? So these are the options that we have looked at. And where have we looked? Of course, we have looked at where most materials are used. We know that about 40% of materials in terms of their carbon footprint are used in the construction sector, and another 40% are used in manufacturing. Residential houses are the most important product of the construction sector, both in terms of the carbon footprint of their production and in terms of the value. And cars are the most important product, consumer product in the manufacturing sector. So those are the two products that we look at in this report. And so we look at the implication of resource efficiency strategies on those two products. Now, I'm happy here to present our modeling results. We have modeled this for the G7 countries and for China and India. The G7 countries, because this report was requested by the G7, and China and India because of their overarching importance and to represent developing countries or emerging economies. In industrialized countries, it is common that in the life cycle of buildings, energy use is the dominant cause of greenhouse gas emissions, and that materials are not insignificant, but they are less important. And if we look into the future and we employ a 2-degree strategy of decarbonizing the energy system and increasing energy efficiency, we think that the carbon footprint of buildings can be reduced by more than 50% just by work on the energy side. Implementing these material efficiency strategies on top of the transition to a clean energy system would reduce emissions by another 35%. Emissions from materials would come down close to zero, partly because of the carbon credit that is given through the use of sustainable use of wood in the building construction. The situation in China and India is very different. There's a much more rapid rate of new construction today. That means that the use of building materials is large, and there's a lot of emissions associated with the construction. There is lower emissions associated with energy use, in part because there are lower heating requirements, in part maybe a reflection also of the development status. By 2050, clean energy transition would ensure that these emissions come down also by about 50%. And here material efficiency can even have a larger impact, given that we aim at the emissions from materials. This can be reduced substantially. And so total life cycle emissions of these buildings in China and India could come down by another 60%. And this is a really significant reduction. Where would we find those emission savings? Well, in the G7 countries, by far the most important strategy is the more intensive use. And that means building fewer buildings and satisfying the existing needs for shelter, using less floor space. And there are various ways in which this can be done. For example, multifamily homes tend to be more space efficient and smaller per capita than single family homes. at transitions between life stages, people have often stay in their home when, for example, children move out, and then they have more floor space than they need. So if this transition is enhanced, and so on. So there are various ways in which the more intensive use can be achieved. Now I would like to look at vehicles. For vehicles, we also foresee there is a clean energy transition that includes the widespread employment of electric and other clean vehicles, which ensures that emissions could come down substantially by 2050, and employing the set material efficiency strategies could result in another 40% reduction on top of the emission reductions that can be achieved through clean energy. In China and India, the situation is again different from the G7. We would expect that there is a lot of currently unmet demand for individual mobility, that rising incomes will make people to meet those demands, and that would result in an increase of emissions even if there is a clean energy transition. And the emissions reductions that we think our strategies can achieve are similar to those in the G7 countries. Here, it is actually about reducing the numbers of vehicles on the road through things like car sharing and ride sharing, and reducing the size of vehicles that are the most important strategies in terms of material efficiency. And so these are, again, more intensive use strategies as they were for buildings. And with those, we can attain the most important reductions. Overall, these emission reductions are really significant. They are at the scale that is interesting in terms of meeting the 2 degree, 1.5 degree targets. And so it's 20 billion tons in the cumulative period from 2016 to 2060 in the G7 countries, and 36 billion tons in China and India. Unfortunately, this is not yet sufficient to reach the targets. And so things like deep energy retrofits of existing buildings and an even faster transition to low carbon materials and to clean energy will be required if we really want to stay on the 1.5 degree trajectory. And with that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Reid Lifset.
We can't hear you. You need to unmute.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you, Edgar. My role in this research was to examine to review policies related to material efficiency. It's clear from our research that to realize the benefits of material efficiency, policy intervention is really needed. Policies need both to increase material efficiency, and policies are needed to ensure that that efficiency actually leads to greenhouse gas reductions. These policies need to adopt a life cycle perspective in order to avoid burden shifts between emissions on the one hand from the production of materials, and on the other from those, the emissions from consumption of energy during building use. The review of policies in the report finds a lack of rigorous evaluation of policies related to material efficiency. Understanding the effectiveness of policies is crucial, but currently lacking in many cases, and that is needed if material efficiency is to lead to greenhouse gas reductions. The review revealed that although material efficiency policies exist around the world, they are mostly not focused on climate impacts. And conversely, climate policies often ignore the materials perspective. For material efficiency policies that are in place, we see that they often target end-of-life products and their material recycling. While this is important, such policies should be targeted at and evaluated in terms of the greenhouse gas reductions, not on the quantity of materials diverted from landfill. For material efficiency in buildings, many opportunities are shaped during the design process, as was noted earlier. Public policy towards design is typically achieved through building codes and standards developed by industries and adopted and enforced by governments. As Edgar Hertvich noted, the increased intensity of use in housing requires behavioral and lifestyle changes, but current policy often inhibits those changes. In the US, it's not uncommon for local governments to mandate minimum, that is, larger house and lot size. Tax policy in some countries favors capital gains or provides other tax benefits based on the value of a home. This too encourages larger houses. Downsizing, that is moving to a smaller dwelling during family transitions, such as with children leaving home, divorce, or death of a partner, can reduce underutilized space. Real estate transfer taxes, sometimes called stamp duties, which must be paid when property or land is sold, however, can discourage shifts from smaller homes by reducing the seller's income from the sale. Policies for material efficiency can narrowly target a particular life cycle stage, as, for example, those addressing intensity of use. Other policies can have impacts across the entire building life cycle. Taxation of virgin materials and removal of virgin resource subsidies are examples of the cross-cutting policies which may have both broad and significant impact. Use of government purchasing power can demonstrate the viability of new technologies and strategies. Piggybacking on building certification systems such as LEED and BREEAM by governments provide opportunities to capitalize on existing and evolving mechanisms for advances in construction practices and building design. Incorporation of both highly targeted and cross-cutting policies into nationally determined contributions, known as NDCs, can serve as a formal means of the pursuit of the goals of the Paris Accord. Some countries have started doing this. For example, India included materials into its national building code, focusing on materials which could be selected, easily dismantled, and reused at the end of their building life cycle. China's NDC specifically mentions a commitment to the efficient use of materials. It includes measures aimed at, among others, improving the efficiency and lifespan of existing and new buildings and promoting the use of recycled construction materials. Japan's NDC, for example, includes a commitment to use blended concrete. So thank you for this opportunity to review the findings of our policy analysis and our overall report. I would be glad to answer any questions if we have time at the end of the webinar.
Thank you so much to both of you, Edgar and Reed, for this interesting presentation. And we'll use the chat function particularly, and it's great if you can stay on a little bit and monitor what comes in, and we'll see how much time there is at the end, or maybe even over the break. And now I'd like to hand over to Victor Kissop, the Deputy Executive Director of our sister agency, UN Habitat, and with whom we're working very closely on the built environment and sustainability in the built environment, for the roundtable on pathways enabling change. Victor, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning as well for those of you who may still be in the morning. I'm glad to be here this afternoon in Nairobi. And perhaps I should start off by letting you know who you have as speakers. Starting from what you have on screen to the left, you have Her Excellency, Madame Nusa Bouchareb, who's the Minister of National Land Use Planning, Urban Planning and Policy for the Kingdom of Morocco. And of course, most of you know Inge Anderson, the Executive Director of United Nations Environment Program. And we have Javier Manzanares, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. And then we have Janez Potocnik, who is the former European Commissioner for and co-chair of IRP. Perhaps I'll just start off by saying a few words, if I may. I mean, the first segment this morning, today on Race to Zero dialogues highlighted the importance of public debate and the consensus and collaboration that will shape the net zero urban areas we need tomorrow. At the same time, the human and socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 today foreshadow the cost of current climate inaction. They also underscore the necessity of fully integrating the SDGs into policy decisions. A 2015 report from the Economist Intelligence Unit found that the expected value of a future with 6 degrees Celsius of warming represents present value losses worth about 43 trillion US dollars, 30% of the entire stock of manageable assets. The housing sector consumes significant amounts of energy, as households account for about 19% of total worldwide energy consumption. The buildings and construction sector is accountable for up to 39% of carbon dioxide emissions. With the building stock set to double by 2050, emissions, energy, and resource consumptions of the sector are almost set to increase. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time for policymakers to mobilize resources and fully integrate SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. And if I may add, I just heard this morning in the news that the UK government, through Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has come up now with a UK climate plan that speaks of a green industrial resolution and actually has an interesting point. And out of the 10 points, it speaks about greener housing, which includes homes, schools, and buildings. So that should be interesting. Having said that, may I now give the floor to Inge Anderson to say a few words before we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to see you, Victor, our dear colleague in our sister agency, Habitat. Let me also greet Madame Bouchareb, it's a great honor to meet you, Madam Minister, as well as, of course, Javier and Yanis, who are working so tirelessly in their specific roles. I think here it is important to pay tribute to the work of the IRP. We just heard the presentation from our two colleagues about the kind of science that the International Resources Panel brings forward, which is absolutely critical. Look, as opening, let me just come with 3 quick points here. We need to understand that building and construction is sort of the sleeping giant in climate action and resource efficiency. And that means that the kind of science that we just heard being presented really matters. With almost 50% of resources extracted going into housing and into infrastructure, well, then we have a to-do item that we need to tackle. And we also know that action today is not commensurate with where we need to be to reduce climate and material footprints. We say, and this is based on the 2019 Global Status Reports for Building and Construction, we say that we are adding floor space the equivalent to a new city of Paris every week. It's sort of something that people can remember. So it works generally. So the first point is the sleeping giant, time to wake up. My second point deals with the fact that buildings operations has received some degree of attention, but building materials have to be an absolute essential part of the decarbonization strategy. And here, I really applaud these regional roadmaps that are being constructed, if you like, because that's where we will really find the solutions. We see, for example, in the ASEAN region, cement production expected to more than triple by the middle of the century, and in Latin America to rise by 60%. That's something that we need to understand. There is an infrastructure gap, but how can we meet that gap, ensuring that we do not have the associated carbon intensity? So major building components such as cement and steel are the hardest to decarbonize. And I think we all recognize that. And that's where that concerted action from the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, from the kind of work that the IRP has come out with, looking at resource efficiency and climate change, can really make sense. And my last point is, this is not hopeless. We can win this race to zero. And that's why we are here today talking, because we have this window of opportunity that is unique, will not come back. Right now, the world is pouring money from the public sector, yours and my taxpayers' money, and the money of future generation, because most of this money is borrowed. That money we're pouring into the private economy. So, and so far 13 trillion have dispensed, and we are expecting another 20 trillion to be dispensed before 2021 is out. Where's this money going? Are we going to use this to go back to the old dirty, toxic, polluting ways and resource intense ways, or are we going to flip that green switch? And here that opportunity is there right in front of our eyes. And it's up to us that work in this space to inform, to advocate, to shift. And those shifts need to be around a sort of must-be future-proof future. And that means, because surely we are not going to saddle the next generation, both with the pandemic debt, as well as a destroyed planet. So we need to really see governments leading by example with retrofitting buildings, social housing, as part of these stimulus packages, investing in a green future. At the same time, we need to see governments pour effort into the NDCs that are going to be submitted in for COP26. And here we already see some good examples of the sort of next gen type stuff. India, the national building codes includes materials, which is really good, which can be selected and dismantled. China, the NDCs includes commitments on material efficiency. Japan, NDCs includes commitments on blended content, blended cement. But it's also important that we think about the socioeconomic dimensions of this. $1 US invested in energy saving, in energy efficiency, saves around $2 to $3 over the lifespan of the technology. So building efficiency, building energy efficiency, renovations create jobs, create opportunity, as well as creating a sustainable future. So that, Victor, is my little intro here. We can do this. The race to zero is possible. We have the absolute moment of making this real. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Inga, for that. And let's see if we can engage the rest of our speakers. And for those of you who are not English speakers, we do have interpretation on another channel if you wish to follow the questions as we ask them. And my first question is to the Moroccan minister, Madame Bouchareb. My question to you is, what role do buildings play in Morocco's NDCs, which according to the Climate Action Tracker is one of the most ambitious NDCs and compatible with the objectives of the Paris Agreement?
Merci, bonjour tout le monde. D'abord, c'est un plaisir de pouvoir participer aujourd'hui à ce panel qui est très important, notamment en cette période qui n'est pas facile, une conjoncture mondiale assez difficile, et à toute situation difficile, il faut des réponses spécifiques, des réponses innovantes et surtout des réponses rapides. Et donc, je tiens à remercier l'Alliance mondiale du bâtiment et de la construction, la GABC, le World Green Building and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development pour l'organisation de cet événement. Et aussi, je remercie également la GABC pour tout le bilan positif et probant qu'elle a pu réaliser en si peu de temps. Effectivement, avant de répondre à votre question, je souhaite remercier en fait la personne qui a en fait parlé du Maroc. Et puis surtout, il y a eu une vidéo qui a été lancée pendant le segment 1 qui a dit que le Maroc et le Gambia sont assez avancés dans leurs indices et je le confirme. Toutefois, je tiens à signaler que la carte qui a été affichée par rapport au Maroc n'était pas correcte. et n'affiche pas en fait réellement les frontières réelles du Maroc. Et je demande à ce qu'il y ait une rectification par rapport à cela de la part des organisateurs. En fait, je voudrais juste, après mon mot introductif, parler un petit peu du Maroc et de son indice. Comme vous savez, le Maroc fut le premier, parmi les premiers pays à adhérer à cette prise de conscience universelle pour lutter contre les changements climatiques consacrés par le sommet de Rio, en ratifiant un ensemble de conventions pertinentes et en adoptant aussi des programmes et des actions en la matière. Aussi, le Royaume a participé activement à la COP 21 et à la mise en œuvre de l'accord de Paris. Et il a organisé la COP 22, qui était la COP de l'action. Et je me réjouis de me retrouver entre ma famille qui plaide pour lutter contre les changements climatiques, parce qu'à l'époque, je coordonnais en fait l'agenda de l'action pendant la COP 22. Et le Royaume, comme vous savez, du Maroc, malgré que c'est un pays qui est très peu émetteur des gaz à effet de serre, est fortement aujourd'hui engagé pour assurer la transition vers un modèle bas carbone, tout en renforçant son adaptation d'abord au changement climatique, et a mis en place ou a déposé son indice en mois de septembre 2016 pour poursuivre ses efforts en la matière de lutte contre les changements climatiques. Donc, on était, bien entendu, parmi les premiers pays à déposer son indice pendant la COP22. Comme vous savez, l'indice marocaine ou du Royaume du Maroc, c'est une indice qui vise une réduction à hauteur de 42% d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre d'ici 2030 par rapport au scénario normal. Et aujourd'hui, on est en pleine révision de cet indice pour la revoir à la hausse. Et comme vous savez aussi, grâce à une volonté politique insufflée par les orientations de Sa Majesté le roi Mohamed VI pendant la COP22, le Maroc s'est engagé à porter sa contribution à 52% en révisant en fait sa consommation en énergie renouvelable et de la porter jusqu'à 52% à l'horizon de 2030. Concernant le secteur de l'habitat, et j'ai suivi avec beaucoup d'intérêt les différentes interventions pendant cette matinée, éventuellement lors du segment 1, je trouve aujourd'hui que le segment du bâtiment, qui est un segment très porteur de la relance économique, il constitue aujourd'hui une menace et une opportunité en même temps. À titre d'exemple, au Maroc, le secteur connaît une forte dynamique déjà qui se traduit par la construction de nouvelles villes, aussi par la construction d'un nombre très important de pôles urbains. Et on produit aujourd'hui plus de 150 000 unités par an. C'est un chiffre qui traduit aussi un certain nombre d'outputs ou d'émissions dont les bâtiments représentent aujourd'hui au Maroc 33,6%. Et sur ces 33,6%, on a le secteur du résidentiel qui représente 25,4% et qui est responsable aussi de 11,8% des émissions des gaz à effet de serre. Juste pour vous dire qu'aujourd'hui, l'action climatique dans ce secteur représente pour nous une opportunité à saisir pour produire une nouvelle génération de bâtiments avec une faible empreinte carbone, tout en réalisant bien sûr des économies d'énergie et des conditions de rentabilité, et surtout d'amélioration des conditions de vie des citoyens. Pour le secteur du bâtiment, aujourd'hui, le Maroc, à travers son indice, il a mis en place un certain nombre d'engagements et qui sont traduits déjà, dans la plupart sont traduits aujourd'hui en programmes concrets et opérationnels. Par rapport à ces actions, on a déjà mis en place la réglementation de performance énergétique pour les nouveaux logements. Il y a aussi la mise en place des MEPS, l'étiquetage énergétique des équipements électroménagers, bien sûr en prioritisant tout ce qui est réfrigérateur et climatiseur. Il y a aussi une action ou un programme de mise en place d'un système de refroidissement et de chauffage, et plus particulièrement la transition vers de nouvelles générations, moins consommateurs d'énergie et bien sûr moins énergivores, ainsi que la promotion d'un certain nombre d'équipements comme le solaire et le photovoltaïque et la consommation en électricité basse de basse consommation dans les logements, notamment les logements qui sont aidés par l'État. Nous sommes bien sûr tout engagés à revoir, à mettre en œuvre notre indice de façon accélérée, parce que la crise aujourd'hui nous a permis de sortir avec un certain nombre d'enseignements et aussi il a dynamisé l'action publique, notamment en termes d'optimisation des intrants, notamment l'intrant concernant la consommation énergétique. Mais je pense qu'aujourd'hui, cette crise devrait constituer pour nous tous une opportunité, sachant que les pays sont aujourd'hui en train de mettre en place leur plan de relance économique afin d'impulser leur économie et de réorienter vers de nouvelles trajectoires, à savoir un changement de paradigme pour lequel on est en train de plaider à chaque moment. Mais aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on a plus de possibilités d'accélérer ce changement de paradigme en matière de consommation, notamment dans les secteurs les plus énergivores, à savoir celui du bâtiment. Il y a un autre point que je devrais peut-être, sur lequel je voudrais m'arrêter quelques secondes, c'est celui de prioriser l'action concernant la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Effectivement, il y a des indices qui sont importants, qui sont très ambitieux, mais dans ces indices, il va falloir qu'on revoie un petit peu les priorités des priorités, notamment la priorité concernant l'axe résilience. Aujourd'hui, on a besoin de développer au niveau des indices des pays qui sont moins émetteurs, l'axe résilience et surtout l'axe adaptation. Je voudrais aussi m'arrêter sur un point qui est celui de consommer les matériaux locaux. Aujourd'hui, une des solutions sur laquelle le Maroc travaille, c'est celle d'utiliser des matériaux de production locaux, bien sûr, avec la mise en place d'un programme qui permet de minimiser tout ce qui est utilisation des matériaux qui demanderaient qui sont émetteurs déjà, consommateurs énergétiques et émetteurs des gaz à effet de serre, mais surtout de travailler sur un programme qui permettrait de renforcer cette nouvelle façon de voir l'acte de bâtir dans sa composante matériaux de construction. Je tiens par la même occasion à dire qu'il y a un point important sur lequel on devrait baser aussi la réflexion de mettre en œuvre les indices, c'est de consolider les chaînes de valeur. Aussi, à travers cette conjoncture, on voit que la chaîne de valeur est un élément très important à mobiliser dans le cadre d'un certain nombre d'alliances, et le Maroc a déjà mis en place son alliance de bâtiments, et c'est à travers cette chaîne de valeur qu'on pourrait aussi travailler pour le même objectif, mais cette fois-ci en optimisant bien sûr les efforts des uns et des autres et en travaillant vers le même objectif qui est celui d'arriver aux objectifs de l'accord de Paris et surtout d'arriver aux objectifs de Race to Zero, qui est aujourd'hui un des objectifs qui est, à mon avis, un objectif réel, un objectif qu'on peut atteindre, et le seul moteur qui pourrait nous permettre d'atteindre cet objectif, c'est aussi de repenser un petit peu notre façon de travailler collectivement, notre façon de travailler aussi de façon très collaborative, aussi bien à l'échelle des régions qu'à l'échelle mondiale. Voilà ce que j'avais à partager avec vous. Merci, Madame Angel Anderson.
Je vous remercie, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur Victor, pardon.
Je vous en prie. So let's move on now to Mr. Batoknik. I have a question to you on what are the most promising material efficiency strategies in the building sector when it comes to GHG mitigation?
A crucial
Mr.
question.
Batoknik.
Thank you, Victor. A crucial question. Thank you for that. Edgar has presented these data points, but the issue deserves some more context and also a deep dive. Why do I think it is so important to talk about the potential of the different strategies? Material efficiency and circular economy have fortunately gotten a bit more attention in the last years, but most debates ignore that the types of the circular or material efficiency measures are very different. Some material efficiency strategies consist of technical measures, often referred to as circular construction measures. But the strategy of more intensive use, it's a more of a systemic manner, meaning a shift of building occupancy across the cities and the latter is still largely overlooked. Let me first recap the technical strategies, which are certainly very important. The report shows that recycling of deconstructed building material is among the technical measures for G7 countries most important. Using low carbon materials in construction is coming next, as well as designing lean load bearing structures. Extending the lifetime of buildings through repair and renovation, it's a bit trickier. It can be hugely beneficial if combined with energy upgrading, meaning insulation and switching to electrical heating, but it is often very little of benefit if we simply extend the lifetime of current mostly inefficient buildings. But the really important new insight of this report is in the understanding of the massive benefit of more intensive use. The report reveals that well over 20% of GHG emissions from buildings can be saved by eliminating just 20% of the floor space across G7 countries. This space is often underused floor space that people do not need for their quality of life, or that it's even hindering it as it's driving up, for example, the heating costs. This derives from the fact that all the high-income countries are growing their total floor space, while in most of these countries, the population is stagnant or even shrinking. This is where efficiency and sufficiency policies meet. It also means that we keep constructing buildings while many houses are empty or half empty. It means that in certain city centers, we are cramping people into tiny apartments while others are heating their too big houses. Every policymaker, every climate roadmap planner, every city planner, developer, and construction business should pay attention, close attention to this. It is an opportunity for emission reduction which simply cannot be overlooked. Finally, material efficiency strategies can also support each other. For example, a city decides to design its neighborhoods for more intensive use. Some buildings will be renovated in a nice, high quality, well-insulated residences with attractive community spaces, where the strategies of refurbishment and repair come into the play. Some houses might become obsolete because people move into the higher quality community residences. They will have to be deconstructed and their materials reused, where the strategy of recycling would come in. So in sum, if we want to mitigate GHG effects using efficiency strategies, in particular, if we want to address already existing residences, focus on more intensive use for large-scale impacts, and combine it with the technical strategies of recycling, renovation, with insulation upgrading, and the use of regenerative materials. Back to you, Victor.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Manzanares, I want to turn to you now, and perhaps you can tell us what is the Green Climate Fund's approach to supporting countries in decarbonizing buildings and construction?
Yes, thank you very much, Victor. Greetings from Sondo. Pleasure to be part of this panel on behalf of the Green Climate Fund. Our thanks to the organizers, especially our thanks to Inger Anderson, Executive Director of UNEP, and one of our good partners as a great entity to the Green Climate Fund. But Victor, if you allow me to address the question, is what's the approach that the GCF has taken for what we call the initial resource mobilization. So that's the first period of the capitalization of the GCF. So as some of you may know, it was for $10 billion. And that was the initial stage. It was the startup of the GCF. That was back in 2014 or 15. So the board at that time approved the strategic plan for the GCF. As a country-driven organization, as a learning institution, we have been working with entities that get accredited with the GCF. And I have provided on the initial stage a general guidance in terms of buildings and construction, in terms of decarbonizing. So that at par with creating what we call a community of practice of experts. And now what the GCF is doing, and I'm now taking you into the second stage. So the second stage is the the resource, the GCF1, the resource mobilization on the first one for the GCF. So that's an additional $10 billion. So for that, our board has indicated the importance of setting up and creating sector guidelines. This is part of a large undertaking that we will do during 2021, again, in consultation with the stakeholders. So the idea is that rather than being driven only by needs by created entities and per se by countries, we are trying to be more proactive, setting up our own guidelines from the GCF and trying to provide a lot more support to countries. So up to this point, what we have seen is plenty on existing buildings, plenty on building operations, maybe some as well on new buildings, not as much as we wanted to on reducing materials. Now what we see, without preempting the result of the sector guidance on buildings and cities, what we see is a GCF more participative in providing, facilitating mandatory building energy codes, in a renewable energy integration, and a built environment, and definitely in providing appropriate financial instruments all within. I think that's one of the strengths of the GCF. Our board has given us a flexible, important mandate to the administration of the Secretariat, from which the statement is that the GCF is to take on a greater risk appetite than others. So in that connection, we are providing first loss, we are providing risk partial and complete credit risk guarantees. We are going into a mezzanine structures where the GCF is coming in as a junior capital investor. So I think within those parameters, my message is that we see a GCF more proactively involved in delineating, in participating with countries and with accredited entities towards a more impactful intervention of the GCF. I think that's what our mandate is about, and again, that's what our aim is towards. So we are projecting to approve around $2 billion of new projects during 2021, with a balanced composition among our result areas. And we see buildings and cities playing an important role. We also see, when we talk about the appliances and systems within the areas of decarbonizing buildings and construction, we see that appliances and systems also extremely directly related to energy efficiency and with cooling, right? And in cooling, we also see a very important role of the GCF in supporting developing countries. And I'll stop here, Victor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier. Let me turn now to Inga, and just to talk about the enabling environment. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about roadmaps that can help us build an enabling environment. Over to you, Inga.
And I was really very interested in hearing what Madam Minister was speaking about and the kind of actions on the ground that we see happening in a country such as Morocco. So bravo to you, Madam Minister. Let me just say that these regional roadmap and the kind of actions that we just heard from Her Excellency is exactly what we need to see. And the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, the kind of stuff that IEA has been doing is exactly allowing for broader coalitions to take those same steps to move forward. And there's quite a lot of collaboration already happening. We heard from Morocco, of course, and I highlight that, but UNDP, our friends in UNDP, for example, are doing excellent work under the Climate Promise in Cambodia, as an example, or our friends in the World Resources Institute with the GEF resources working in Colombia and in Turkey. So we are seeing, or I could mention what AFD and GIZ are doing in Vietnam on efficiency, energy efficiency in buildings. Ourselves, together with you, Victor, with you and Habitat, we are very pleased under the One Planet Network and the Multi-Partner Trust Fund to support a number of countries as well. So I think that what we are seeing is, as we heard from Her Excellency, countries or regions saying, look, this is too important. We need some roadmaps. We need to find a way forward. That's really good. The issue is now to ensure that this is not boutique, that this becomes mainstream stuff that every country decides to take on. And a second challenge that I think we have is overcoming what we know is a fragmented sector, the construction value chain, right? It's a difficult and complex sector, which is why I celebrate what we speak about in Morocco, or for that matter in Tunisia or in Mexico, where the national alliances have come together to bring a common vision, a common space for co-creating these effective policies that can sort of support one another throughout the value chain. This is not easy. It is very difficult. It takes leadership, both from government side, but also from the private sector, the industry itself. We also need to recognize, and especially in a COVID context, that there are different priorities, different drivers. Some countries really need to push jobs because other sectors have collapsed. Some countries really need to enable that substandard housing is upgraded. Some countries really need to deal with different priorities. So not only finding across the value chain, but also across the governmental set of priorities, those elements where we can embed climate decisions and make these policies integrated. That's part of it, overcoming that fragmentation that does exist. But the good thing is that this has begun. We see countries and cities starting putting this in place. And so the bottom line is 3 things to be done: revise and develop, implement performance-based building codes, lead by example using public housing, because this is where government has a controlling hand, as demonstrations, and attach those green strings to the COVID recovery packages. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We seem to have some very engaging speakers here. So I'm going to return back now to Madame Bouchareb. And my question to you, Madame Bouchareb, has to do with decarbonization. And how do you see the potential of the global ABC regional roadmaps to support the decarbonization of buildings?
Merci, Monsieur Victor, de me redonner la parole. En fait, effectivement, ces feuilles de route mises en place aujourd'hui pour soutenir la décarbonisation, c'est des feuilles de route qui sont très importantes. Tout d'abord, c'est des feuilles de route qui développent une compréhension homogène chez tous les pays pour qu'on puisse aller dans le même sens et avec les mêmes outils, mais cette fois-ci avec une certaine spécificité tenant compte des continents et tenant compte des pays. C'est une feuille de route aussi qui nous donne en fait un cadre orientatif et des approches à travers lesquelles on peut avancer rapidement dans la mise en place des objectifs de décarbonisation dans le secteur du bâtiment. Aussi, c'est des feuilles de route qui nous permettent de quantifier en fait les lacunes ou d'identifier les lacunes, que ce soit des lacunes en termes de mesures ou bien des lacunes en termes d'axes d'intervention globale sur lesquels on peut travailler pour réviser un petit peu notre façon de voir, notre façon de faire, et par ailleurs notre indice et bien sûr notre programme sectoriel. Ceci dit, ces feuilles de route permettent de répondre à 2 questions en fait. La première question, c'est comment compléter et comment renforcer l'action déjà en cours à travers des politiques bien déterminées. Et la deuxième question à laquelle répondent ces feuilles de route, c'est comment planifier aussi à travers les différents domaines que nous menons dans le secteur du bâtiment et aussi dans le secteur en fait de l'habitat de façon globale et de l'urbanisme pour couvrir l'ensemble des dispositifs qui nous permettraient d'atteindre l'objectif d'émission zéro dans le secteur. En fait, aujourd'hui, je voudrais partager avec vous, si vous permettez, deux points importants. Le premier point, c'est que ces feuilles de route restent un cadre orientatif et nous avons besoin d'être dans l'action et l'action rapide et accélérée. Et de ce point-là, je voudrais interpeller peut-être à travers cette conférence la communauté internationale pour que ces feuilles de route régionales doivent être en fait déclinées en des plans opérationnels. Des plans opérationnels qui définissent les actions à entreprendre, un échéancier et surtout, de prioriser en fonction des attentes des territoires. Aujourd'hui, on a les territoires qui sont confrontés à des crises. On a un bâtiment qui souffre d'un certain nombre de changements qu'on est en train de vivre. Un cadre bâti de façon globale qui est en train d'être affecté, notamment au niveau des zones les plus sensibles, des zones rurales, les zones les plus reculées. On a besoin aujourd'hui à ce que cette feuille de route soit déclinée en des programmes et des plans d'action concrets à l'échelle des territoires. Et donc, on a besoin d'un accompagnement et d'un appui et d'un soutien pour la mise en place de ces feuilles de route ou de ces programmes qui traduisent non seulement une volonté et un cadre d'orientation, mais qui traduisent en fait les actions à entreprendre pour que les NDC soient mises en place réellement par les territoires eux-mêmes qui sont dans l'opérationnel. Le deuxième point, ou mon deuxième message, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, à travers cette crise, on a senti et on a tout intérêt à ce qu'il y ait un vrai échange, un vrai réseautage, un partage d'informations aussi rapidement que possible et un transfert de technologie aussi rapidement que possible pour que notre plan d'action ou notre feuille soit une feuille qui tient comme des expériences réussies des uns et qui nous évite de tomber dans des erreurs qui pourront nous faire perdre du temps. Et le temps, aujourd'hui, c'est l'argent, c'est des points en PIB à gagner. Et je voudrais aussi signaler que la conjoncture en fait mondiale et la crise sanitaire nous a poussé déjà à mener cette réflexion. Nous avons en fait animé pendant tout le mois d'octobre des conférences sur comment assurer un cadre bâti résilient à travers cette crise. C'est une conférence qui a en fait mobilisé plus de 2000 participants tout le mois d'octobre. Et à chaque fois que cette question de bâtiment est soulevée, la réponse ou les orientations qui sont retenues, c'est la résilience du cadre bâti. C'est le mot d'ordre aujourd'hui. Et ensuite vient les émissions, notamment au niveau du continent africain, où on est très peu émetteur, mais le bâtiment est très impacté et le cadre urbain de façon globale est très impacté. Mon troisième message, c'est comment arriver à faire ça aussi rapidement que possible. Parce que quand on parle de programme et de plan d'action, ça veut dire qu'on est dans l'action et qu'on est dans la mise en œuvre d'un certain nombre de projets. Le comment, c'est aujourd'hui une grande question sur le plan financier. On a besoin aussi qu'on soit accompagné par les institutions de financement pour que cette feuille de route puisse être déclinée en programme et en plan d'action qui tient en compte les spécificités et les priorités des territoires et des régions et à ce qu'il soit aussi financé ou au moins un appui financier pour éviter tous ces impacts économiques que la crise nous a infligés. Et aujourd'hui, je pense qu'il serait intéressant d'accompagner les pays qui ont été très impactés par la crise, notamment au niveau de la résilience de leur cadre bâti. Et quand on parle de résilience, certainement, notre programme d'amélioration du cadre bâti pour ne laisser personne derrière doit être un cadre qui répond aux objectifs de minimiser au maximum les émissions issues du secteur du bâtiment. Et je réitère aussi l'engagement du Maroc à travailler sur ce plan-là pour que sa feuille de route ou son programme concernant l'habitat puisse être un programme qui répond aux spécificités du royaume et puisse être aussi un levier je dis bien un levier pour une relance économique safe, c'est-à-dire sécurisée et surtout durable. Merci pour votre attention. Merci. Je vous rends la réponse, Monsieur Victor. En fait, le micro.
Mr. Potoknik, I'm going to turn to you now. And the question I have for you, what kind of policy incentives can be created to enable the material transformation we need to achieve global climate goals?
Yeah, thank you. Let me start by underlining what Reed presented about the policy gap. There are currently very few policies which are enabling material efficiency strategies, and even less which are advancing them as a path to climate action. So we clearly need to fill that policy gap urgently, and the report hints to potential policy approaches. Structuring them in my own words, there are 4 essential policy approaches. First, we need to eliminate all concrete policy barriers to material efficiency strategies. We can learn from the report that, for example, in many US cities, the zoning laws forbid multi-family residences, which are usually more material efficient than individual detached houses. Also, many building codes mandate the non-efficient designs of beams and walls based on outdated safety measures. Second, we need to eliminate the less building-specific but nonetheless important perverse incentives to wasteful material use. Currently, the world still spends billions on subsidies for virgin materials extraction, which makes materials artificially cheap and disincentivizes their efficient use. It creates perverse market signals to producers and consumers, locking us all in a kind of quantity-driven economies. Third, we need to advance policies and innovative investments, which also the minister talks about, to promote material efficiency strategies. For example, the report tells us that building certifications should be updated, as should public procurement guidelines. However, policies to promote the important transition to a more intensive use can be more difficult given that this is a more systemic change in city design. It would be important to empower cities and communities to innovate themselves. Innovation funds could be, for example, a way to enable urban designers and commercial developers to innovate communal living concepts that would be attractive for people as alternatives to inefficient residencies. This would, of course, particularly be important for cities and towns with much underused floor space and large sprawl. And finally, we need to make material efficiency an important ingredient of long-term industrial and economic planning, such as the industrial strategies and decarbonization plans, including the NDCs. Across all, we need to improve policy uptake and evaluation. This is a quite new policy field, or at least much underused. It will be important to integrate it effectively, evaluate these new policies, and continuously learn from analyzing their effects. In summary, I do firmly believe that the only way to really achieve the global climate goals is by combining supply-side energy-related measures with demand-side measures, including decoupling of materials, water, land, and energy from economic growth and well-being, and with nature-based solutions. Currently, our focus is more or less on demand-side energy-related measures, and we are not using the whole policy potential. This is what makes the REC report so important and also very useful. And just to finally add, the responsible use of resources also makes economic sense. So it is a win-win, and why not to apply it? Also to take up the built environment sleeping giant. Back to you, Victor.
Thank you very much for that response. Mr. Manzanares, I'm going to turn over to you now, and perhaps you can tell us how the tools like the regional and national roadmaps help in this effort.
Yes, Victor. The Green Climate Fund is helping countries design, finance, and implement a sustainable urban transformation with the purpose to be replicated to be scaled up and sustained definitely after project completion to achieve our ultimate goal, which is transformational change. The GCF financing is incorporated into regional national roadmaps of sustainable development. And in particular, the GCF bases its climate finance support to feed into developing countries' climate action roadmaps. And particularly, I'm referring to NDCs, to the National Determined Contributions. How do we do so? And that's where it comes what we call the Readiness Program. Our Readiness Program is a grant-based program with a cap of up to $1 million per country. We serve approximately 126 countries that have nominated a national designated authority. It's like our counterparty with those 124 countries. And this up to $1 million a year could be utilized as technical grant support into a number of pillars. One of them is the NDCs. We want to make sure that the support is provided to the country so that the country can come up with a more ambitious NDC. And that's one of them. The other important pillar within this readiness program is for the countries to prepare a country program. So we want the country to express to the GCF how the GCF can be useful in fighting climate change in our two areas of mitigation and adaptation. So that has to be incorporated in the country program with a view to presenting an investment strategy so that we can work from the GCF and we can work with our accredited entities in the structuring, in building that portfolio for each one of those countries. So if I may give examples on how we can work nationally and regionally, probably one of our most successful regional readiness program that incorporates that need to come up to legal frameworks that can be utilized to a number of countries. So that was particularly on our e-mobility readiness that has been used in more than 12 Latin American countries, in which UNEP is our accredited entity, our delivery partner. So the importance of, when we said at the earlier on of mandatory building energy codes, so the importance of sharing knowledge among different countries within a region, I think that gives a very strong argument for the GCF to keep on replicating a regional readiness program. And now, more specifically, we would love to see those in building and construction, in decarbonizing building and construction in what we call our area of buildings and cities. Back to you, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And Inga, I'm going to go to you last. We seem to be running out of time. And my question now to you has to do with what are the motivations we're seeing for engaging in a national roadmap development, and what are the actions prioritized? Over to you, Inga.
Victor, sorry, there was a message from Inga. Since we were running 15 minutes late, she unfortunately had to leave and she sent her apologies. She had a different commitment. So I'm afraid we have to pass over that.
Absolutely.
But she alluded to some of the additional points already in what she said. So I think we've covered it partially. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. I found this to be quite engaging. And over to you.
Thank you very much, Victor, and to our fantastic panel. This has been really, really exciting. We've been eating a bit into our lunch break, but I think it was well worth it, and we provided at least a lot of food for thought. We now have a 15-minute break, right, to be accurate, a 13-minute break. We hope to welcome everybody back to the rest of the program. The next session is giving the voice to the participants via breakout group discussions. So please note that there is a different link only for this segment that will enable us to split up into these groups very quickly after a short presentation in a plenary setting. And at the end of the breakouts, we will come back together for reporting back. So we're posting the link as well into the chat to make sure that we do not lose anybody on the way to the next room. And again, thanks for this great discussion, for everybody's interest, and we'll see and hear each other in 13 minutes. Thank you. Bye-bye.